Boy, that bio is really embarrassing. I get embarrassed. I'm an artist like you, and I grew up in a flyover state. I didn't see my first play until I was 15. I started by performing for the Hey Crew, right? So I understand the importance of being an artist emerging in a rural space, of even calling yourself an artist when you don't have a lot of role models for you. So I wrote a script, and I'm kind of getting off of it already, but that's where I want to center my talk. With myself as an artist and growing up in rural red state of Kansas, to generations of soybean and corn farmers and cattle farmers, and how the land that I grew up on really influenced my life and my art, and how I've approached my roles as a civic leader as well as an arts administrator. Okay, so hello, my name is David Wayne Reed. Thank you so much for having me in your beautiful state today. I have kayaked the Niobrara, I've driven through the sandhills, the cornfields, paid homage to Willa Cather, and I've maybe even cried to Bright Eyes. I am so appreciative for your state and your arts and cultural assets. I am from the lands of the Kansa, the Osage, the Kickapoo, and the Oceti-Sakowin. I'm from prairies, tilled asunder that once were a shallow sea. I'm the son of Kansas farmers, of gardeners, and of grave diggers, of ancestors who worked with the land, who plowed, who broke ground, who dug in, and who grew and farmed me. I honor this path that has brought us here together today. This is the land on which I was born and raised, on the state line dividing Kansas and Missouri. We back up right to the free state of Kansas. But that's the land, these acres that we tamed, that we grew. And this land was my first muse, my first stage, my first teacher. Growing up on a farm in Lewisburg, Kansas, without formal creative outlets for my talents, I created my own venues for self-expression. We lived off the grid, connected to the world via AM/FM radio. So being alone in the country, I was left alone to my imagination. I had an imaginary friend, and I was really just inspired by being on that playland. And I was also the pink sheep of the family, right? My dad, I remember when I was little, I was riding on his lap on the tractor, and he asked me if I wanted to be a farmer someday, like dear old dad. And I said, no. I want to be a backup singer, I want to be a stripper, and I want to be an artist. Those were my early goals. I knew that I wanted to be a performer. And so, next slide, I studied acting. I went to school for theater. Look at that hair. Babetown, population me, come on now. And I received my degree in theater from the best veterinarian school in the nation. Go K-State! And then I had headshots, and really that was the only talent I had. I could type, and I had headshots. And so I moved to Kansas City, next slide, and I became a founding member of Late Night Theater. We were a really irreverent, gender-bending theater troupe, and we did big send-ups of famous campy movies like Valley of the Dolls, The Birds, Stepford Wives, Carrie, on. And during my time there, I played over 100 characters, a lot of women, a lot of men, and we became kind of a cult sensation in Kansas City, and that's really what put me on the map. It was while I was at Late Night, I also studied dramatic structure. Yesterday, for those of you who were here, I told you that the first artwork that really made a difference in my life was the movie 9 to 5. I loved 9 to 5. And so I wanted to create a stage adaptation of it, an all-male stage adaptation about taking on the man, right? And so I wrote and adapted that, as well as an original script, Supermodels in Space. And that's where I really honed in on being a playwright. I was an actor in Kansas City. I wasn't going to wait around for people to just give me roles or cast me in things. I wanted to create my own work. Right? There's a real DIY element to a lot of artists. We have to create our own platforms if we want to see our work done. And so that's where I started, and that's what I did. And all of my early career in late night theater is now held at the Gay and Lesbian Archives of Mid-America at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. What? Okay. Next slide. And so I returned to my rural roots and kind of merged my background with late night theater and doing send-ups of movies with my own background. Most of my art starts with drawing, and I am terrible at drawing. I told people yesterday, my 7th grade art teacher told me that I couldn't draw and that I would never be an artist. That's a true story, and so I got out of art. I wish she could see me now, but she's dead. So I always start out with a drawing, and then I partner with people who can do art a lot better than I am to create a set. And this was a spinning semi-truck on stage, and it would spin around to the sides, and on the back there were video projections which would show you driving down the highway and whatnot. Anyway, that was Mother Trucker, and of course it had a sequel because all of those trucker movies of yore have a sequel, and so I created Mother Trucker 2, Ride On. Next slide. Continuing to follow this family. It was a real family story and kind of in odd ways a morality tale, a really irreverent morality tale, but one that reminds us that home is where you drive it. And so that had several productions, including one in Florida. So what do you call a gay farmer? A Jolly Rancher, right? So that was the name of my first one-man show that I did while on residency in Seaside, Florida. I found out I was doing this show through a Google alert. I think I told you all in your storytelling session yesterday to set a Google alert for yourself. That's where I learned that I was going to be presenting a one-man show 16 days after I arrived there to a paying crowd. And so I put together this show. And it's about growing up gay on a farm, of not fitting in, of kind of being a high heel in a soggy lawn, as Dolly Parton might say. And doing this show, I did this show in front of strangers, and I just shared my story, and people laughed, and people cried, and people came up to me. I remember one guy said, "Thank you for sharing my story for me." And it impacted me so deeply. I'm like, all of these people cannot be homosexuals that grew up in the country. But what I figured out was that what is personal is universal, and we all identify with not fitting in. And when we lead with vulnerability, it opens up spaces for other people to share their stories, right? There's something that is really magical that happens between the speaker and the audience, and that's that third space that's created. You know, I might be talking about my love of Dolly Parton or hay bales. That might remind you of when you were putting up hay bales, or your memory with Dolly Parton. And so we start to co-create together. And that's a real powerful way to build community and model our vulnerability through storytelling, right? I wrote down here, I think we reclaim our stories when we name them, when we share them, and when we release them. I totally believe in that. Next slide. So I wanted to theatricalize this. I'm a playwright, right? So I wrote Help Yourself. It's a dark comedy that explores the story of those self-retreats, those self-transformational retreats, and the infinite economy of self-help, restless ambition, and the aftermath of personal change. Everybody have that friend who's gone through a recent big change, and you're like, who is this person now, right? You know, and making space for that. And here I decided to crack the fourth wall and make theater really personal. In this next slide, the leader of this group, his name's Gabe Newland, he tells the participants how to rewrite their stories.
Let me tell you something. If you aren't the hero of your own story, then you need to rewrite your story. And life gets exciting when you start rewriting. What about your story deserves a rewrite? Is it the love you let go?
No.
Is it the relationship that ended because you couldn't say, I'm sorry? Guys, are you letting someone else write your story for you? These are big questions.
I love that. How many of us are brave enough to rewrite our answers? Rewrite the stories that we've been living for so long, living in the identities that we've been living in for so long that maybe no longer work for us. It's scary to rewrite our stories, but it's so powerful and transformational to rewrite our stories. And it's possible. It's totally possible. because storytelling is powerful and transformative. And I wanted to share this experience that I had received with, in doing my own one-man show, as well as with that show, kind of teasing with the audience and putting my poor friend Ashley, on the mic in the hot spot. I like making stuff personal. And so I created a storytelling show called Shelf Life. And it's really just show and tell. I had the shelf built, had objects put on it. People would bring an object, and then they would share a story about it. And inevitably, people laughed, people cried, because people share in that vulnerability. And especially now, in times as fraught as this, it's so necessary that we do share our stories in public spaces and get off of our screens and get in the humanity of one another and share those stories. And so for 6 seasons, I produced 26 shows, hosted 155 storytellers, and they included everybody from a former NFL player, 2 Guinness Book World Record holders, a pastor, a surgeon, poets, hey Matt Mason, sex workers, drag queens, ex-convicts. Everybody was on the stage. I believe in democratizing the performance stage and letting all voices be heard. We had a lot of objects, including a certificate of U.S. citizenship, Kama Sutra wallpaper from a former sex club, 7 drumsticks from the band Loverboy. We had a lot, right? And at each show, storytellers shared their objects and their corresponding stories. And it was never about the object. It was about family poverty. It was about white privilege, alcoholism, suicide, chasing your dreams, being displaced, faith, obsession, professional envy. It connected audiences with people and connected people to their own humanity. And by sharing these stories, by sharing our stories, and as I'm doing now, as we've been doing through this week, we expand our community. The Pitch newspaper, our big arts and cultural magazine back home, said, "Shelf Life tears down walls one story at a time." And that's the sweetest, most meaningful compliment I've ever gotten to any of my work, because it's most meaningful when your intention meets the outcome, right? Okay, next up. Oh, there's some of the folks, some of the brave souls that told their stories. My friend Kathy Liao told a story on Shelf Life. Thank you, Kathy. All right. And the age range, too. I had a 5-year-old, I had an 80-year-old, and everything in between. Like, let's continue the intergenerational conversations, please. There's so much to learn from everybody. What is that saying? Everybody should have a mentor over 70 and under the age of 30? Think about that for yourselves. And if that's a gap, fill it. I come from a long line of quilters, and my Aunt Orpha died on Father's Day of 2016, and I began a process of grieving while also clearing out a relative's house. Has anyone ever cleared their dead relative's house? Whoa, that is not for the weak. That is not for the weak at all. It's quite a process that's very emotional, and you deal with like what you keep, what remains, what you let go of. My God, I mean, it's just like the jackpot of psychotherapy, right? You know, everything you need to go through. So we unloaded the house, and like I said, I come from a line of prolific quilters, and there are hundreds of quilts. I'm the heir. I own these quilts now. What do I want to do with them? So I wanted to make meaning of this and do something meaningful to honor my family as well as where we came from. And also, my Aunt Orpha just died, and so having my own existential crisis that the family was shifting, and it was not going to be as it was, and it's even more important to document. So I decided I wanted to document these films. You can go to the next one. And in those quilts, I saw the landscape from above. You know, when you get up in the airplane, it all looks like a crazy quilt. And so I'm like, 1 + 1, that equals an idea. Around that time, my nephew got a drone, kind of from suspicious means, actually, but we decided to take it out on the farm and shoot some footage. As above, so below. So I applied for a grant from the Warhol Foundation to make a film. I'd never made a film before. I never applied to the Warhol Foundation. And then I got it. I'm like, oh, I've got to learn how to make a film. Privilege problem, I totally get it, I understand. But so for the course of the year, I set out to record and film my family's acreage, and I filmed only on the farm, and I worked with dancers, with a marching band, folks from my family's church that I grew up with, a music and dance conservatory, and we created these seasonal mandalas on the landscape and shot this all with a drone and a phone. And it was all based off of, again, my existential crisis. Like, what is life? What is the meaning that we leave behind? And I had a lot of deep spiritual questions. And the guiding spiritual question for me was when I was a young man, I asked my parents if they believed in reincarnation, right? And my mom was like, no. And my dad was like, possibly. And this was something that we didn't talk about in the First Christian Church of Lewisburg, Kansas, right? That doesn't really come up. And my dad said yes, and I thought that was so curious. I was like, why do you say that? He was like, well, take a perennial crop of, plant, or maybe a volunteer crop of wheat. It comes up every year. It regenerates. It returns. And that was really great solace for me, and provided the impetus for this film, which I called Eternal Harvest. Yeah, thank you. So that was Eternal Harvest, and since it was filmed on the farm, I wanted to premiere it on the farm. And I think for any of the creative districts, I had such a great experience working with my county conservation district as well as the county farm tour and inserting and integrating art into agriculture, put the art in agriculture, put the art in infrastructure. So I encourage you to do that. Reach out. There are so many quilters, and quilters are artists. Okay, so I partnered with the Miami County Farm Tour, and on Mother's Day weekend of, I guess that was 2018, I created this installation in my dad's antique tractor shed and created kind of a contemplative little quilt chapel for people to take in the film. And it was really incredible just get people on the land and connected to the land and show my grandma's quilts. And like Megan said, this film has played all over. My dad was like, is anybody even going to want to see this? And people, I mean, really, and I mean, he was just as shocked at like, why would anyone care about his livelihood and what he just takes for granted? And it's played film festivals from Buenos Aires to India and all over, and on PBS. On PBS? What? I mean, that's crazy to me. I worked with about 125 people making that. Like I said, a composer, my church, the dance conservatory. I already said that, I'm sorry. Yeah. And it also played at a Kansas wedding. Some couple wanted to play it at their wedding, and that was the sweetest. Next slide. And then I returned back to my one-man show roots, and I created Goliath. My name's David, right? It's a show about overcoming, throwing rocks taking down giants. And that was all going really, really well. And I like to work with technology a lot. I worked with my guy Steve, and we did a lot of projection mapping, kind of creating this living scrapbook to supplement the storytelling, which I thought was a really cool effect. It's my big bald head. Next slide. Things were going well. I was in the big room for the big Citywide Arts KC luncheon, talking to everybody. Look at that. And that was February 3rd of 2020, which was the same day I was appointed to the Municipal Art Commission of Kansas City, as well as to the executive committee of the airport 1% for Public Art project. This was a pivotal day. And then, COVID happened. And so my creative economy was shuttered because of the pandemic. Theater people, performers, right? What we do? We got on Zoom, or we had to pivot. We had to be elastic, right? That's what we had to do. And this was existential for our livelihoods, for our identities. Because if I am not creating an art, am I an artist? Yes. Yes, you are. But that was the existential crisis I had during that time. Did anybody else wonder WTF during that time, right? Most of y'all didn't. Okay, well, good for you. And so those were all shuttered, and it showed us the limitations of our architectures and the institutions and the ability to display and to provide access to art. And so we had to move into space beyond our own. And so it was that time that I moved into the public art space, and that profoundly shifted me. Next slide. Yeah. Has anyone flown through the new Kansas City Airport terminal? Yeah, cool, good. Come on down, fly on through. So we got in on the ground floor. That's me and the director of aviation standing where the new Leo Villarreal installation stands. And I remember thinking at that time, one day I'm gonna fly through here and will not be able to believe this. But here's something that's really crazy that happened during COVID. We were all in Zoom screens. We had to move into Zoom screens, and something incredible happened in that. When the Municipal Art Commission used to meet, they met in a big room in City Hall with literally wooden gates between you and the audience, and it's like the chair sits here, all the underlings sit around. There's a real hierarchy. And what happened on Zoom screens was that we were able to overthrow that because everybody had equal real estate on the Zoom screen. And it worked really well for theater people like myself because I can work a screen, honey, right? I know how to do that, and I know how to work nonverbal communications. And that came in really helpful. And because of that, and also being 2020 and the year of the murder of George Floyd and everything, we really were able to move the process and shape the process and created one. I'm going to get ahead of myself, but we were able to shape that process in profound ways that had outcomes that are staggering. Next slide. So then we put out a call for artwork, and this is some of the artwork that's included. We had 56 panelists adjudicate nearly 1,900 applications. Before then, the city had just hired a consultant company, 2 people from San Francisco, to come spend $5.65 million on our art. We decided we didn't need them. We wanted it homegrown. We wanted it community-driven. We had run the assessment. We had surveyed the community. What are the aspects that you want in this airport? What are the things you value about our community? And based off of that survey and that assessment, then we were able to take it on, build out our panels, make sure that our panels were diverse, that our panels included artists and not just bankers and bankers' wives. No shade, no offense, but it's so important to get artists at those decision-making tables. It makes such a difference. Yeah, clap for that. Yeah. It makes such a huge difference in what is inevitably put in. So we had 9 different panels of 9 different people each. We paid our panelists, 2. Clap for that. And And what turned out, in our former airport, 91% of the artwork were all white men. The other 9% were white women. That's what it was. In our new airport, and the other airport, they were mostly out-of-towners, not from Kansas City. This time around, 75% of the artists at our new airport are local or have local ties. Nick Cave is from Kansas City, y'all know that? And 78% were women and people of color. That's the difference it makes when you build that in at the top. When you build that in at the top and make that your outcome. Be mindful in your intention. So it's not tokenizing, right? You get in and you're like, oh, well, we don't have a black potter. Oh, well, we need a Latina dancer. No. You get people at the tables that are making those decisions that are the Latina dancer, that are the black, poet or sculptor. Get them in at the decision-making table. It's so crazy to me. I'm just going to go off on this for an effort, or just for a second, but I've been in a lot of theater situations where people are like, I just want to diversify my audiences, and I just can't understand why I can't diversify my audiences. It's like, well, who are you putting on stage? White people. Well, people are going to come see their own stories. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. I just don't understand. Anyway, this is our new airport, and I think of it not so much as an airport, but as a new art museum with arrivals and departures. This is a Susani Park up here. This is the Nick Cave up center, the Leo Villarreal. George Rodriguez. Over there on the other side is Jill Anholt, and down there is my good friend Kathy Liao and her beautiful work. I work with her. Crazy, I love it. Okay, next slide. So creatively, I really wasn't doing much. I was in a bureaucracy. I was being a bureaucrat and dealing with airport stuff and dealing with city officials. Oh my God, right? And so I returned to the land. I don't know if that's not playing, but I set fire to the prairie. Anybody been on a prairie burn before? Get yourself on a prairie burn. It's so cool. It's really the phoenix and the flame kind of arising, its own metaphor to experience and connect with the land. But during that time, I couldn't go anywhere except for my house and my boyfriend's house, and that was it, and ordering takeout. And so I turned my attention to where I could be safe, and that's the outdoors. And so I went to the prairie, and I worked with the Miami County, my home county conservation district, and they put me in touch with all of these prairie remnants, tallgrass prairie remnants in my county, most of which, there were only like 22 or so, and most of them were all stewarded by women. I thought that was incredible. And so I set out, I was going to work on this documentary. And then COVID happened, and I couldn't interview them. They're elderly women. I'm not going to put them in danger. So I decided to film the land instead. Has anybody been out to the tallgrass prairie? Yeah. Everybody should go to the prairie. It's one of the most diverse ecosystems in the entire world. And only 3% of it remains. It's one of the most endangered ecosystems we have, and we live on it. Most people are surprised to hear this. It used to expand for millions and millions and millions of acres, and now it's all gone. And like my family with Eternal Harvest, I wanted to document that which is leaving, right? So I commissioned a poet, and over the course of a growing season, I documented this landscape. Next slide.
Each exhale, a promise. Each whisper, a benediction. The ground beneath us, the ground we share. Roots touching water, touching land, touching us still. Mother and father below, sister and brother below. Roots hold us all in place, to return each breath to the breath before. And still I sigh for beauty and love, and each breath brought new into the world, and each that leaves. These flowers, this land, this longing to hold on to what cannot be held.
This longing to hold on to that which cannot be held. Isn't that what we're doing in our artistry? We're creating for something in front of us, beyond us. So I returned to the shed, but this time I went to the hog shed instead of the antique tractor shed on the farm, and I did a premiere. I did a little picnic on the prairie. But I wanted to bring people out to the prairie. One of my favorite things to do is introduce people to the prairie for the first time. I love doing first-time stuff with anybody. It's like one of my, I don't know, it's a kink. I don't know what it is. But I put together this small picnic where people could bring some food. We provided sandwich, and then my dad and I mowed a path around the perimeter of the prairie. So we had poetry and music and walked around. You can play the next one. And this is one of my favorites because I love what happens when people get out on the prairie. Like, something happens. Like, their posture changes. They feel more grounded. They feel more gentle when you talk to them. That's our little remnant. It's only like 10 acres on the back 40 where we grow the weed. No, I'm kidding. I just wanted to see if y'all were still awake. And it was just like such a glorious day. I love it, like in Kansas, and it's probably this way in Nebraska. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, because literally just like 10 minutes before this, it was like dark skies. It was gonna hail, right? And then, nope, just opened up. I love that. Next slide. This is my mom, my supermodel, and I picked her a bouquet on Mother's Day of prairie flowers, and then I was like, hey Mom, will you come outside and can I take a picture of you? And this became the image for both Land and Flower, as well as for a public art project that I applied for and received. I wanted to insert the prairie back into the land that had plowed it asunder. Right? And so this was at 16th and Main with our Kaufman Center Performing Arts building there. And I just love the idea of reinserting and rewilding that landscape into the landscape that took it away. Does anybody know Terry Tempest Williams, author? She said once, the land is the source where my power lies, where the source of all of our power lies. I took to this land for my inspiration, for counsel, and for power. And what I've learned from it's what I've learned as an artist, arts administrator, is that land is a teacher, and that art is an ecosystem. Next slide. It requires planting. It requires our shared vision, to seed it, to pollinate it, to make sure it's as biodiverse as possible in its outcomes as well as in its intention, its conservation, and its advocacy and cultivation. Next slide. Because I think arts and culture transcends traditional settings such as frames or museums. For God's sake, I performed on the back of hay bales and plows and tractors. Arts and culture and the artist and the subcultures who create them are an economic boon to any community, providing value, identity, positive social change, and prosperity. I also believe that arts and culture are critical to a healthy democracy, and they shape our cultural and civic policy. We should have a shared vision of where we want to go and where we want to dig to get, and who we want to dig with. Who are you digging in with in those creative districts, in your own practices? Do you share a vision? Are you communicating your vision to each other? Next slide. I love this, the seed. What is it? The Fibonacci sequence, right? There's an order to everything, and we're all seeds playing a role. Look to our landscape. Look to our flowers. Look at the knowledge that they have. They can teach us so much. Does anybody read Adrienne Marie Brown? She wrote a brilliant book, Emergent Strategy, talking about how to gather together and take your cues from nature, from mushrooms, from dandelions, trees. It's incredible. There's so much we can learn. We have to pollinate. That's my big veiny arm. Oh my God. But we have to pollinate. We have to create pollinators. We have to plant milkweed in our creative communities. What is that pollinating plant in your artistic community? What is it? Hopefully it'll be a sunflower that turns to the sun and keeps turning to capture the brightness and keeps shining that light forward. This is about inclusion, and this is so important to me. If you're going to do public art, if you're going to do community art, then you have to represent the people that are in your communities. It's not a top-down approach. It's a bottom-up approach. Public art should be diverse, inclusive, accessible. It should help us find our way to make meaning, to honor histories, to share visions, and to shape our hopes. And what I know is this, and I've already tapped upon it, but it matters when artists are at the table. I've seen what happened, and I've seen the conversations that happen when artists are brought into the decision-making process, and I've seen the repercussion of what happens when they're not. It's a bunch of art that is a totem to your inability to envision far into the future. I love that quote. I attribute it to Elizabeth Warren, but I don't know if that's true, but she said, "You are either at the table or you are on the menu." That's harsh, but that's truth. If you're not there, they don't even care. You're not even brought into considerations. Someone else is making the decision for artists because there's no artist at the table. They're like, oh yeah, that'll be good enough. That'll be good enough to give them just 1%. That'll be good enough that I don't have to ask for an additional $1 million like Michael Markey is asking for the state of Nebraska. Thank you for asking for more. We've got to ask for more. Anyway, back to the airport. I'm sorry, I get fired up. It was so important that we democratize the process, though, and it really made such a difference. And mindfulness, like I said at the outset, greatly alters the outcome. Next slide. And so be like a quilt. Have a lot of fabrics as part of your quilt. It makes it all the better, all the richer. We have to be mindful and touch base with our land and with where we've come from, our shadow, and with stepping into both our shadow as well as into the future, keeping a foot in both. Next slide. This is a tallgrass prairie run. I went out and I collected seeds with some seed collectors, and it was so beautiful and it reminded me of what we have to do. We're always collecting seeds, and we're always planting them, and we have to store them. We have to create a seed bank for our own creative districts, our own communities, so that we can replenish and become a perennial crop rather than just a boutonniere. You know, a boutonniere artwork is a mural, and there's nothing wrong with a mural, but then how is it maintained? Does it just peel off? What do we do then? We've got to upkeep it. It's not a one and done kind of deal. I said a little bit about this yesterday, but our art shows us what we prioritize and what we center and what we remember and what we fight for. You know, I drove around, I was looking at the public art at Beatrice the other night. You know, it's like this community really values its park system, its veterans, its trucks. You know, I mean, there's public art about that. It shows us what we value, and that's important. And every community has different sets of values. You have similar values, but ascertaining what those are, it shows who you are and what you value. Next slide. So I'm going to end with the bee. I think there's no greater mascot of our ecosystem and the power and precarity of it than our bee. I was raking hay with my brother when we were on the farm. I was 8, and we raked over a hive in the alfalfa, and my brother had the good sense to jump off, fight or flight. I froze. I'm a froze or fawn person, and so I sat there, and they got trapped in like that canvas umbrella, you know, and they didn't have anywhere to go, and I'm swatting at it, which made it worse, and I got stung 18 times in like 3 minutes. And that's when I became a superhero. But the bees are disappearing, right? And without them, we will not be able to survive much longer without them. They're vital to our ecosystem, to our sustenance, to our lives. And bees are like artists. Creative districts, you all are beekeepers, and we're all in this hive together, okay? This is something we can't take for granted or even think of as a nuisance. because it stings when we mess with it, and without it, we stop pollinating our culture and our communities. Our hive cannot be raked or torn asunder because we will get stung, and then the bees will die, and all of our creative colonies will collapse. And as artists, as arts leaders, as arts administrators, it's our duty to continue the buzz and keep our ecosystem alive. Thank you so much. I'm David Wayne Reed. Pleasure to have you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.